Tonight, all-out blitz.
This election requires every single one of us.
Democrats roll out the big guns as Republicans look to topple Democratic strongholds.
We have the worst inflation we've had in 40 years.
Plus, home attack.
Mr. DePappy immediately pulled the hammer away from Mr. Pelosi and violently attacked him with the hammer.
Charges against the man suspected of attacking Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband in the couple's home. And affirmative action on the line. The Supreme Court takes up the issue of race and college admissions. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Dead-even races, spooked candidates on both sides of the aisle begin the final week of trying to convince voters. Welcome to Faith Nation. In our Washington studio, I'm Matt Gelka.
And I'm Abigail Robertson. Tonight, battleground races across the U.S. come down to the wire in an election that could change the balance of power in Washington.
Republican Senate candidate Herschel Walker down by a knife's edge in a new polling to Democrat contender Raphael Warnock, painting the race as a referendum against Democrats and the president.
He's lying to y'all. He's saying that he's your senator. And I'm telling you, no, he's Joe Biden's senator. He's not Georgia's senator. He's Joe Biden's senator.
The final push comes after a star-studded weekend for Democrats, rolling out heavy hitters like former President Barack Obama to campaign in ever-tightening races across the country. With 8 days to go until the midterm elections, Republicans, too, are pulling out the big guns as former President Donald Trump hits the trail later this week. So joining us now to talk about all things politics is Nathan Gonzalez, wearing his Halloween costume as editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us, as always, tonight on Faith Nation. So we'll get right to it. A New York Times Siena poll out today shows neck-and-neck Senate races in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada. Republicans only need to gain one seat to take back a 50-50 Senate, where Vice President Kamala Harris holds the tie-breaking vote. So are the former presidents, Obama and Trump, are they going to be the difference makers here?
Well, when all these races are so close, anything can make the difference. I think that for both Trump and Obama, it's largely a play to the base, right? That Republicans need to make sure that all of the former president's supporters get out to vote, even if they may not like establishment Republicans. On the other hand, Democrats need to boost turnout and make sure that their voters come out, and that's where President Obama can come in. I mean, I'm skeptical that there are a lot of undecided voters who are waiting around to see what Obama or Trump tells them to do. I don't think that that's how they're thinking. But we really have two different stories. We have the Senate, where we're not really sure which party is going to be in control, but the House, the discussion is different, where we're talking about not if Republicans win the majority, but by what margin.
Yeah. So, Nathan, I want to ask you about those undecided voters. A Politico Morning Consult poll shows 11% of voters in America are in that undecided category right now, with just about a week out until Election Day. And 83% of those undecided voters say the country is on the wrong track. So what does that tell you about which way undecided voters might be leaning with a week out until Election Day?
Well, that's great news for Republicans, because if that many people believe, that many undecided voters believe we're headed in the wrong direction, they're going to look at who's in charge. And we have a Democratic president, a Democratic Congress. And so I expect undecided voters to break disproportionately for Republican candidates. The question is how much are they going to do that? But that's why when we, particularly on the House side, when we give our range, it could reach right now it's plus 8 to 25 seats. It could reach that upper level because there are so many close races. And if those undecided voters break, then Republicans should win. That being said, if you're undecided at this point, I feel like the choices are pretty clear and stark, but there are still a segment who are out there.
I want to switch quickly to what could end up being a big surprise here. You have New York Governor Kathy Hochul's lead over Republican candidate for Governor Lee Zeldin. It's narrowing, apparently, in the latest polls. Florida's Ron DeSantis campaigning this weekend in New York. President Biden in New York today for a funeral, notably not on the trail. How big of a surprise would it be here if a reliably blue Empire State turned red?
I mean, it would be big. This is not a conversation that anyone, I think, really expected to have 6 months ago or 12 months ago when looking at all all the races. But it's clear to me that this race is not going to be a blowout. This is not going to be a typical Democratic blowout that we usually see in New York. Question is Zeldin going to get over the top? I believe that this probably comes down to the city, New York City, and do the Democratic voters that are there, do they turn out to vote? If Democratic voters turn out to vote, that a state like New York should continue to vote Democratic, but it's getting serious.
Yeah. Well, Nathan, we're going to have to leave it there tonight. We'll see what happens. Thanks for joining us tonight.
No problem. See you guys.
Well, charges against the man who reportedly broke into House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's home and attacked her husband. The suspect, charged with assault and attempted kidnapping, now facing up to 50 years in prison for the 2 federal charges.
The brutal assault has raised new questions about political violence in America. Dale Hurd has the story.
Police have yet to release a motive for the assault on Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, at their San Francisco home early Friday morning. Police say the suspect, David DePapi, made it all the way to the 2nd floor of the residence and reportedly asked, "Where's Nancy?" before confronting the speaker's husband, 82-year-old Paul Pelosi. Pelosi called 911, and when officers arrived, they saw DePapi take a hammer from Pelosi and hit him on the head.
Mr. DePapi immediately pulled the hammer away from Mr. Pelosi and violently attacked him with the hammer.
Pelosi is recovering after surgery at a local hospital. It's not known if the hammer used was DePapi's or Pelosi's. What is known is that DePapi is described by those who know him as a homeless addict with mental illness. His politics are not clear. DePapi's home was reported to have had a Black Lives Matter sign and an LGBT rainbow flag in the window. He's said to have written rambling posts online. At one point, he reportedly declared, "Jesus is the Antichrist." Some Democrats blame the attack on conservative political rhetoric.
Politics where some in office or who aspire to office work to stir up division, to make folks as angry and as afraid of one another for their own advantage.
But conservatives have also frequently been the victims of political violence. Then House Majority Whip Steve Scalise was shot when Republicans were targeted during a congressional baseball practice in 2017 by a Bernie Sanders supporter. And Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was the target of an assassination plot after a leak that the Supreme Court was about to overturn Roe v. Wade. Justice Samuel Alito warned that members of the court could have been possible victims.
The leak also made those of us who were thought to be in the majority in support of overruling Roe and Casey targets for assassination by killing one of us.
Members of Congress have been particular targets in recent years. Violent statements and threats are reported to have more than doubled since 2017 to almost 10,000 cases. After the assault Friday, Pelosi thanked fellow members of Congress for their support, quoting a passage from the book of Isaiah. And Republicans condemned the attack.
What happened to Paul Pelosi is despicable. It's unacceptable. We've got to figure out how to bring our country back together where we have a civil conversation.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, turning now to the war in Ukraine, more than 40 Russian missiles rained down on Ukraine in one day, targeting the country's critical infrastructure.
This leaves Ukraine's power network struggling and many Ukrainians without power and water as the cold weather closes in. But one group of Americans is stepping up to help keep Ukrainians warm this winter. Chuck Holton has the story.
Rolling blackouts are hitting Ukraine's capital for the first time since the beginning of the war. Here in the city's largest power plant, technicians are working day and night to repair the system under constant threat of renewed attacks by Russia.
There was not a single military object among the targets. Not a single one. The enemy wants ordinary citizens to have neither water, no light, no heat, to watch them freeze and die in front of the whole world.
We have to be very careful about what we film when it comes to the power infrastructure because everything power related in Kyiv right now is a target. But The Ukrainians are working very hard to put together teams of people who can fix things that get broken very fast.
The situation is quite difficult. Up to 30 to 40% of the energy infrastructure have been damaged in some way. The energy system is manageable. Together with the emergency services, we are renewing the damaged substations. I am absolutely sure that once the en masse assaults have been stopped, it'll take us from 2 to 3 months when we find ourselves in a situation when the consumers will not be under any restrictions.
So far, the residents of Kyiv are enduring the sporadic outages without losing their spirit, bolstered by news about continued gains by their forces.
Kyiv will stand, Ukraine will not fall. Everyone from the office of president to the municipal worker, men and women, united. Some on the battlefield, some in the rear. We believed in ourselves. We have nowhere to retreat, nowhere to go from here. We are defending our land.
But closer to the front lines, in many liberated settlements across the east, this winter will be more than difficult, and without modern conveniences, could be deadly.
All the normal things that they can count on for winter, that's all been disrupted. And, you know, it's going to be very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to survive this winter.
These American missionaries are stepping into the gap with a fleet of vans to distribute aid to remote villages near the front lines.
A couple of us got a harebrained idea and said, hey, let's buy some vans. Let's see what happens. And now we have 7 vans, and we've had 40 drivers come out so far, and it's been awesome.
Driving supplies into an active war zone carries a hefty amount of risk. But these volunteers say their calling is greater than the danger.
None of us get paychecks to do this. We're all volunteers. A lot of us spend our own money to fill gas tanks, buy hotel rooms. We're willing. We've all made that choice of like, hey, this might cost us our life, but it's the right thing to do. Ultimately, we believe that God's just led us to do this, and that his promise isn't to keep us alive, it's to be with us.
From Ukraine, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Thanks, Chuck. Well, coming up, the Supreme Court take on the thorny issue of race in college admissions, how that could change affirmative action in America.
The Supreme Court is taking up 2 cases that could overturn major precedent on affirmative action. The practice has been a standard in higher education for 40 years to increase diversity on college campuses. But now a conservative and multiracial coalition of 22,000 students and parents argues it's actually leading to discrimination.
The cases challenge policies at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, where race is among the criteria used in the admissions process.
Some applicants are incentivized to conceal their race. Others who were admitted on merit have their accomplishments diminished by assumptions that their race played a role in their admission. Racial classifications are wrong.
The university retains a powerful interest in preventing the backsliding that would occur if this court took away the power to decide this important social policy issue from the people of North Carolina.
The cases raise slightly different issues for the conservative-leaning court. Harvard's admissions policies are accused of discriminating against Asian Americans, while the case against UNC argues considering race violates civil rights law and the Constitution. The court is expected to rule next year. And joining us now for more on this is Brad Jacob, Associate Dean and Professor at Regent University School of Law. Brad, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Faith Nation. And I just first want to ask you, affirmative action has previously been upheld by the High Court, including in 2003, when it said it helps ensure racial diversity in higher education. Is there any reason to think this court might rule otherwise?
I think there are significant reasons, although you never know what the court's going to do until it does it. But some of the justices, notably Justice Clarence Thomas, have been very critical of affirmative action. You know, the world has changed a lot in the last 50, 60 years. At one point, affirmative action was primarily directed at fixing prior discrimination. If a university had denied black students, say, then they might be giving them a leg up to try to even the scale. But today we're in a world where you're not typically correcting for discrimination, and so it becomes a question of, can a university use race as a factor just to get a desired level of diversity? And I'm not at all sure that a majority of the court will say that they can.
Brad, I want to ask you about the Supreme Court's own definition of diversity. Today in the hearing, Justice Thomas unloaded on the lawyer defending UNC's use of affirmative action in admissions, saying, quote, "Diversity seems to mean everything for everyone." The lawyer responded with the Supreme Court's own definition of diversity as a, quote, "broadly diverse set of criteria that extends to all different backgrounds and not solely limited to race." So would a ruling against UNC in this case mean rewriting the High Court's definition of diversity?
Well, I don't know that that definition is carved in stone. The court has spoken of it in different ways, in different cases. Most of higher education in this country is not very diverse on issues such as religion or political viewpoint. Most of the elite universities are very skewed towards sort of a secular and liberal perspective. So race is one factor, but race is the one where you have a real constitutional issue. And so I think the court may no longer be willing to accept the idea that the university can intentionally consider someone's skin color just to achieve that desired diversity.
And Brad, quickly, when do you think we'll have a ruling on this? By the summer, right?
Yeah, it'll certainly come down by the end of June. Often the big blockbuster cases, and this appears to be the big case of the current term, they often come down at the very end. So my guess would be not until late June, but they could surprise us and come down earlier in 2023.
Well, of course, we'll all be watching. Brad Jacob, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Well, coming up, a perfect storm, record high inflation meets a shortage of farm workers. Why Congress thinks it has a solution when we come back. Welcome back. Well, Americans continue to face sticker shock at the grocery store. One factor driving up food prices is a shortage of farm workers.
Congress is now debating a bill that could provide a solution. Heather Sells explains.
Food prices have jumped more than 11% in the last year. It is the fastest rate in 4 decades, and farm labor is part of the equation.
I haven't had a domestic worker in the field for 12, 14 years. They just won't do it.
Rod Parker oversees 2,000 acres of vegetable production here in Virginia, and although he advertises, he says it seems impossible to get local help.
We have 60 guys here. There's not 60 guys or 60 men in Virginia that will do this like they do it. That'll come and work and be here at 5 o'clock and start and work till the job's done, no matter what time it is.
Parker has relied on the government's foreign guest worker program, known as H-2A, for years. It allows U.S. farmers to hire overseas workers for seasonal help.
It's not easy, it's not cheap, but it's stable.
The H-2A program began in the late 1980s, and it is essential for many growers. Parker needs workers to hand harvest his broccoli and squash. By law, he provides housing, covers their transportation from Mexico, and pays a government-set hourly wage plus extra for each box. That motivates many to literally run through the fields to keep their numbers high. The problem, many farmers are not as fortunate as Parker in finding the help. Cato Institute analyst David Beer follows the trend.
Right now, we're poised to import more food from abroad than produce it here at home. And one of the major reasons for that change is the fact that it's more difficult to get U.S. workers to do manually intensive farm labor than ever. The unemployment rate is near a record low for agriculture right now. And U.S. farmers are really hurting to find the workers they need to be able to produce the goods and services that Americans want to consume.
Requests for these workers continue to spike, with some 500,000 expected next year. And this labor shortage is behind part of the jump in food prices. Parker says 20% of his price for broccoli goes towards labor. Add to that rising fertilizer and transportation costs, growing drought conditions, plus the war in Ukraine, and it's no wonder food is so expensive. One possible solution, a bill in Congress that would reform the H-2A guest worker program. Advocates say it would streamline the process and expand the program to include year-round workers. That could change the game for dairy and livestock farmers. It would also establish a path to citizenship for longtime workers.
Right now, the Senate is divided about how to proceed with the program and with immigration in general.
Well, it passed the House last year with bipartisan support. The Senate still has not been able to reach consensus. If lawmakers can solve the farm labor shortage, they will help to keep groceries stocked and food prices down. That could be a political win for both sides of the aisle. Reporting in Colonial Beach, Virginia, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Heather, thank you. Well, coming up, a game-winning toss and victory speech worth celebrating. This weekend's big NFL victory next.
Finally tonight, blessed and fortunate. That's how Washington Commanders team captain Terry McLaurin describes his first NFL trip home. On Sunday, the Commanders faced off against the Colts in McLaurin's hometown of Indianapolis.
And with family and friends in the stands cheering him on, and at least one of us up here watching at home, the star receiver caught a key pass in the final seconds of the game, setting up a touchdown and a 17-16 comeback victory. But even more admirable than his agility on the field is McLaurin's humility in the locker room.
God's good, man. He's been so faithful in my life, and his mercy is the reason why I'm standing here before you guys.
McLaurin accepted the game ball, saying his teammates' trust in him is incredibly humbling and giving all the glory to God. What a great story.
So
well, that's going to do it for us tonight on Faith Nation.
We'll see you tomorrow.